I don't know how how we make ourselves relevant again.
We don't know how to compete with these social media basket-making influencers or whatever, but we have to.
I'm going to put this one in the category not of propaganda, but just of elitist delusion. Hey, it's Jordan. I am in Flint, Michigan, East Palestine, Ohio, Tumwa, Iowa. Please support the only independent outlet on the ground covering what the corporate media covers up. Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. I have horrible news for you. Very, very big injustice going on at MSNBC, where Rachel Maddow, the queen of Russiagate and other propaganda, has to take a pay cut from $30 million a year down to $25 million a year. And perhaps more importantly, an MSNBC insider admits that they were 24/7 Kamala Harris propaganda headquarters. Very interesting. This from the Daily Beast. Rachel Maddow takes pay cut with MSNBC's future in jeopardy. If you don't know, it's been announced that MSNBC will be spun off from NBC into a different company. MSNBC star Rachel Maddow is taking a $5 million pay cut amid growing uncertainty about the channel's future. The Ankler reported Thursday. Maddow, who currently makes $30 million a year at the network, renegotiated for $25 million a year for the next 5 years. Oh, just awful. This is a difficult time, and they need to keep her. No one else can do what she does. You can't build a brand like it overnight. I think you can find other people to pay less, actually, to do rank propaganda and reenact and recreate a Cold War or a new Cold War like she did with Russiagate. But, you know, what do I know? Comcast, the owner of NBC Universal, plans to spin off several NBC channels like MSNBC and CNBC into its own company. NBC Universal chairman is currently heading the effort, expected to be completed by the end of 2025, called SpinCo. Well, they do a lot of spins, so that's not a bad title. The channel's currently at a crossroads following President-elect Trump's victory. According to Nielsen data, ratings dipped to 40% less than they were this time last year, though execs are counting on viewers to come back the way they did in 2016 once Trump's administration gets underway. I'll add here the line, and once they jack up the fear to get back those baby boomers who watch them. Here's an interesting part, very, very eye-opening. Producers are also grappling with how to platform conservative voices at the, quote, only safe space for a liberal TV audience, as one MSNBC insider put it. Quote, we were so Harris propaganda that when she lost, viewers were shocked. One on-air pundit said, quote, it turned into one giant circle jerk and echo chamber. If MSNBC wants to be of service to its viewers, they can't keep them in fantasy land. Wow. That is a doozy. One more time, an on-air pundit, quote, we were so propaganda for Harris that when she lost, viewers were shocked. It turned out to be one giant circle jerk and echo chamber. If MSNBC wants to be of service to its viewers, they can't keep them in fantasy land. Well, I think this is deeper than MSNBC, and I'm going to play you some clips to show you that fantasy land. But I worked at Fox, if you don't know, and I worked at MSNBC. This was over a decade ago. So first I was at Fox for a few years, then I got, nauseous at Fox. And I said, you know what? Let me try across the street. MSNBC is literally across the street from Fox. Maybe it's not cable news and corporate media that's not right for me. Maybe it's just right-wing propaganda at Fox. So I went across the street. I worked at MSNBC for a little over a year. And very quickly I learned, oh, no, it's both of them. It's all of it. I don't care if it's right-wing media or liberal or left-wing media. It's just all propaganda, and I couldn't do what I wanted to do, which is report on things that actually matter at either. But it's insightful here when an unnamed on-air pundit admits that they're just doing, rah-rah Team Blue propaganda, which is a disservice to our viewers. And I won't name names, but I have a family member who I love, who happens to be the target demographic for MSNBC and happens to watch a lot of it. And I always tell this family member, you're being fed a lot of bullshit. You are very disconnected from what's going on in the real world because you are being fed from Rachel Maddow and, the Morning Joe that everything's dandy in the economy and everything's wonderful around America. And the worst problem we have is Donald Trump and, the threat of democracy. And I've always had to tell this family member, we don't have a democracy. But, these cable news channels are a very, very hard drug, whether it's Fox News feeding you MAGA fantasies and right-wing disinformation, or MSNBC, with their limousine liberals like Rachel Maddow and Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski feeding you the Team Blue nonsense. But it's a good thing, actually, that, a coward, they wouldn't put their name to it, but an MSNBC pundit, so some on-air person is feeding to the Daily Beast. Yeah, we're just 24/7 propaganda for the DNC and the Democratic Party. That's why we've called it MSDNC. And maybe it's a disservice to our viewers to keep them in this giant circle jerk and giant echo chambers. Maybe that's why we're not bringing in new audience, bringing in new audience other than, older baby boomers. No offense to the baby boomers. We got a lot of them who watch here. But I want to show you, this quote was from We Were Nonstop Harris propaganda during the election. They've actually been nonstop propaganda after the election too, trying to justify and rationalize and, basically feed their audience a rationalization for why they were so wrong, for why they were in such an echo chamber, for why their viewers were misled that Harris was going to win. And this was a slam dunk. Let me show you just a few. This is Joy Reid after the election. Tell me if you notice any hypocrisy or, false messaging here.
Young people who supported her the most strongly. It was 18 to 29-year-olds who gave her 55 to 46 a victory. If it was just the young, if it was just the people who will inherit this country, she would have won. If it was just millennials, 51-46, the people who right now are struggling to, buy a home and afford their lives and really have the biggest economic struggles. Because let's be clear, it's not the people who deliver Trump, which is Generation X, my generation. They got a little coin in the bank. They just want a tax cut. They are not the people who are struggling. It is the people Claire described are those millennials who can't, like my kids. I have a Z and I have millennials. They can't afford their lives. We still have to help them. They're trying and they're striving. That's the people who are struggling. They took a chance on that lady. They had the faith in the future to say that this Black and Asian woman could lead this country. So that's where we need to bet on the young. My generation, Generation X, the people who grew up on WWE and Hulk Hogan and Donald Trump did this. They did this. They are the ones who looked in the face of somebody who said, I want to be a dictator on day one.
Interesting, because when there was a candidate who brought in millions of young people into the political process, was doing incredibly well, beating Hillary Clinton, Biden, and the rest of the gang in the Democratic Party among young people, she wasn't so sympathetic for the young then. She wasn't so, if only the election, if the only voters were the young, we'd have a President Bernie Sanders. No, she smeared Bernie Sanders. And by the way, so complete hypocrite. She cares about the young when it's the corporate establishment status quo candidate that loses. And it does well among the young. Doesn't care about the young when it's somebody who will actually provide us health care, when it's somebody who will actually provide education, when it's somebody who will actually do something about the corporate corruption in this country. Yeah, doesn't want the election to just be young voters then. But she's actually also not telling the truth to her predominantly older audience at MSNBC, because as I showed you, youth turnout, age 18 to 44, so that's Generation Z and millennials, age 18 to 44. Youth turnout has dropped 7% from 2016 to 2024. So in 8 years, turnout among the young has dropped. Maybe that's because the Democratic Party has been continually providing them crumbs while repeatedly saying, fascist, democracy is hanging from a cliff, but then providing nothing but crumbs and abandoning the very few bold promises they made. $15 minimum wage. Public option, $2,000 checks, stopping drilling on public land. I could go further. Not fighting to extend a child tax credit. Providing relief during COVID for a year and then letting all those lapse. Not doing what they could have done, which is cancel all student loan debt. So she's lying still. She's lying. And by the way, I go around the country. There's plenty of people in Generation X suffering economically. Maybe not as bad as millennials, maybe not as bad as Gen Z, but there's plenty of people in their 40s and 50s, Gen X, that are economically struggling, that have never recovered from the housing crash of 2008 and 2009, who then COVID poured gasoline on their struggle economically, who are working 2 to 3 jobs, who are rationing insulin, who are buried in medical debt. So she's wrong. It's not just Gen X. Hey, they're doing okay and they just wanted their tax cut. There's some of that, but completely disconnected. But that's not the only propaganda we've heard from our friends at the Kamala Harris propaganda headquarters. Don't take it from me. Take it from their own insider, their own on-air pundit who told that to the Daily Beast. Let's listen to Mr. and Mrs. Scarborough because they were also feeding this propaganda after the election.
Because you have that stacked on top of what happened on college campuses this fall, stacked on top of what's been happening on college campuses over the past 4 or 5 years. I have said this on the air, and every time I've said it, people said, oh, you're just saying that because you're a white conservative. No, I'm just saying it because every Democrat that we have ever sat down with dinner with over the past 5 years who have kids that go to colleges say their kids are afraid to speak in class because they'll be canceled. Let me say that again. And they're all Democrats. Everybody that we've had dinner with, if they have a kid in college, you go, how the Red Sox going? Yeah, fine. Yeah. Sitting there eating. Beautiful day today, wasn't it? Yeah. You know, my daughter at University of Virginia, she's afraid to raise her hand in class because if she says something that's politically incorrect, she will immediately be canceled. She'll be shunned from class. She'll be destroyed in social media by noon. So they just sit in class quiet. Now, if any of you, which camera? Give me a camera to look at. Boom! Oh, look at that one. If any of you out there say, oh, that's just like a conservative, white, Southern guy, da-da-da, that's what you're losing. That's what you're losing.
So at Kamala Harris propaganda headquarters, the millionaires on Morning Joe, both of them have a net worth upwards of $20 million, by the way, who then went to kiss the ring of Donald Trump down at Mar-a-Lago after calling him a Hitler and a fascist for several years, after creating him and helping create him in the first place. I did a video on that last week on the evolution of Joe and Mika. But after serving their predominantly baby boomer audience propaganda that Harris was going to win for as long as they did most of the election. Afterwards, they're still gaslighting and still feeding propaganda and a circle jerk to their audience on why she lost. She didn't lose because of woke. She didn't lose because, you know, the rich people you go to dinner, their kids are scared of raising their hand for fear of being canceled in college. That's not why she lost. She lost because millions and millions and millions of Americans have been canceled right here economically in America. Millions of Americans have been canceled economically. There's the chart. Put it in your pipe and smoke it. That's the real cancellation. This is the real reason she's losing. It's not just the short-term inflation. It's the 50-year neoliberal bubble popping. Look at that red line. That is the top 0.01%, not even the top 1%, the top 0.01%. Orange, the top 1%. That's why people are fed up. That's why people are desperate. That's why people are basically giving a protest vote. A lot of MAGA is a protest vote against neoliberalism. But we want to talk about, my friends, rich kids are scared of being canceled in college. And then they have circle jerks on Morning Joe about, we need to move to the center. We need to stop scaring Americans with our woke talk. Now, has the woke stuff gone too far? in some areas. In some areas, is that the defining reason people vote? No, not the people I talk to when I go around the country talking to folks. So it is absurd. But here's some more. I don't know if this is propaganda as much as delusion. Here is another Morning Joe mainstay, Mike Barnacle. They were talking the other day about how MSNBC is going to be spun off from NBC and made into another company. And these millionaires don't understand why young people aren't watching cable news anymore. Let's play this.
I don't know how they make themselves, how we make ourselves relevant again, because we can't compete with 20-second snippets on an iPhone, walking up the street,
morsels,
getting your entire news digest of the day in less than a minute on your phone as you're walking under the crowd with coffee in one hand and your phone in the other. I don't know how we catch up to that.
Yeah, so Gene Robinson, do you agree with Mike? Because I find this hard to believe.
Well,
that younger voters would be more interested in getting an entertaining 20-second news snippet than watching a cable news show for 4 hours from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Come on. This seems like an easy choice to us here.
What is wrong with these people? Exactly. Yeah. I mean, look, if I knew the answer, I would implement it immediately, right? And reverse this, but we have to compete. I mean, the answer is we don't know how to compete with these social media basket-making influencers or whatever, but we have to.
Oh boy, I'm gonna put this one in the category not of propaganda, but just of elitist delusion. Now, yeah. We live in a bit of an ADHD generation. People do, particularly young people, do like short form stuff. But there's a lot of young people that listen to Joe Rogan for 3 hours in full. There's a lot of young people that listen to longer form podcasts. So these folks think the reason people are turning on them is because they can't retain any information that's presented to them longer than 20 seconds. That's not true. The reason people are turning them is because young people, and it's not just young people. I just think people in general, the predominant audience for cable news is 55 and older. So we're talking under 50. Most people kind of can sniff out bullshit. Most people can sniff out if the presenters, the anchors, the reporters, this and that, are actually reporting the truth to them, are actually connected to the conditions on the ground and what they're experiencing. Most people are not seeing on cable news or broadcast news the actual crises going on in their communities covered. That's where places like Status Coup come in. We are one of the only, not to toot our own horn, but I will. We're one of the only independent outlets that actually leaves the studio and goes around the country covering what the corporate media covers up. From Flint, which is still poisonous water after 10 years. East Palestine, where we've been 8 times covering the corporate sacrifice zone after Norfolk Southern unnecessarily detonated 1 million pounds of toxic vinyl chloride over that community. I'm digging right now on another story on that. I mean, for Kalamazoo, a community being gassed there by a packaging company. Union strikes. We were on the front lines of the UAW strike for 3 weeks covering on the picket lines. Cable news wasn't. We covered the Amazon union organizing a year before they even won. Cable establishment media was nowhere to be found. Yet, not just young, but all people are starting to get smart to the stuff that MSNBC and Fox and CNN and the New York Times and the Washington Post, their coverage is essentially just politics as a sport. Who's up? Who's down? Who scored points today? Who's losing? Conflict, putting forth protagonists, antagonists, narratives, fascism, democracy at stake or under threat. Narratives, 3 weeks, will he, won't he drop out in terms of Biden? Narratives, the economy's booming when most people can't afford a $400 emergency. That's nearly half the country cannot afford a $400 emergency. So it's not that they're getting things in 20 seconds snippets and that's how they want their information. Yes, some. But a lot of people, what they're seeing represented and delivered to them on cable news and also in establishment outlets like the New York Times, Washington Post, the Associated Press, isn't representative of the actual real world. MSNBC, NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, they got, oh my God, they got billions of dollars in resources. They could be all around the country covering the very things we cover. Their ratings would go up because people would actually, radical concept, be informed. But they're not going to cover those things because all those outlets that just described to you are either directly owned by billionaires, or their biggest investors are billionaires and millionaires, or owned by multi-billion-dollar corporate conglomerates. MSNBC is owned by Comcast. And those entities and those owners don't want to cover, don't want to show you the ugly secret underneath America, which is we live in the United Corporations of America, and our government has been purchased. And these very outlets are owned by billion-dollar companies that are routinely lobbying the government, spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year to lobby the government for tax cuts and deregulation. These folks on MSNBC don't have a clue. They're in that elitist bubble for so long, they can't even see straight. That's why people aren't watching. It's not because you're not delivering stuff to them in 20 seconds. People actually can retain information for longer than 20 seconds if the information is actually news, is actually serving a purpose, is informing them, is actually fighting for something. People want news that both informs them, but actually shows you crises that are going on, actually shows you and informs you what you need to know about your community or your state or your country, whether it be corruption, money in politics, environmental genocide, worker exploitation. How many of those stories are covered on MSNBC day to day? So I think it's a wonderful thing that some of the people are coming out of the woodwork at MSNBC to expose the place for what it is. DNC headquarters. Is it going to change? Probably not. When it is spun off and made into its own company separate from NBC, it'll probably just become more liberal opinion. And they will probably bank on, from Maddow to the rest, hey, with Trump out of the picture, because technically, according to the Constitution, this is his last term, unless he tries to disregard that, which I wouldn't rule it out. They might say, hey, once the Trump effect is gone and once Trump himself can't run again, things will return to normal. Things aren't going to return to normal. People are fed up with neoliberalism, with a government serving them crumbs, with a government spending most of its budget on war and killing people across the globe, on greasing the military industrials' coffers. People are fed up. So, TikTok to MSNBC, the rest of cable news.